Hey TCS TV viewers, it's Evelyn from the camera store, and today we're talking about macro photography. Hey TCS TV viewers, it's Evelyn from the camera store, and I'm here with a very special guest, Don Komarechka, who you might also know as Don Com.
That's
online,
right.
On Twitter and everything.
Thanks for having me here. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so we're in the kitchen today because Don is going to show us how he's been able to achieve some of his amazing macro shots that look like they were taken in a high-tech studio right in your own kitchen. So we're going to go over different tips on how you guys can do it at home with some simple, easy tools.
It's easier than you think. Step number one will be setting up a flower inside one of these little clamps. These are called third-hand tools, easily available on Amazon or eBay for $7 to $10. They're simple pieces of equipment. But if we have the flower in one of those clamps and a flower petal or a wildflower seed in the other one, that tool will hold everything together and allow us to get the proper alignment.
Okay, so we've built up this little scene here. Can you just talk about the different elements that we have going on here?
Yeah, fairly simple. We have a wildflower seed, or I don't know what it's called, the sail of the seed, the thing that gets caught by the wind and gets carried on to propagate. They hold water droplets very beautifully, making spherical water droplets. This is a goat's beard seed, also called salsify. It's got a little spider web kind of feel to it. It's kind of nice.
So did you actually go find these, or can you buy them?
If you buy them, you'll get the seeds without this little frilly part, and you'd have to play the long game by planting them and waiting for them to go to seed. I just go and hunt for them. A dandelion seed works as well, and those are much easier to find. We have a flower placed in behind, but importantly, we have a light that is only on the flower, not on the foreground. So I've got a little platypod tripod. Tabletop tripods of any kind work with these little gooseneck arms. It's really easy to carefully position the light exactly where it has to be.
So it looks like you're just using a flashlight in this case. Is there any particular type of flashlight you need to get?
A bright one. The company that I bought this one from is called Nightcore. They make some great stuff, but whatever you've got that might even be in your kitchen drawer right now, try it and see what works. The next step in this process, once everything is all configured here, is to spray that seed with a misting bottle.
Okay, that sounds fun.
One thing that a lot of people don't realize about these bottles, you won't spray enough. And I'll tell you that, and then you'll go and you'll do it, and you still won't spray enough.
Okay.
You really have to cover this with water, and so we'll just make sure that we can record the camera doing that here. And as you slowly add water, you will see it slowly and slowly build. And so now you've got some small water droplets on it, and this is where a lot of people would normally stop and say, hey, let's try to shoot. You've got to keep going. So now our water droplets are getting so heavy that it's actually pulling the seed back a little bit. So recomposing and just adjusting our lighting to varying different degrees can be helpful. Just to illustrate, if I were to have the light here on the foreground as well, it's very distracting for the refraction that we're trying to create. So if we just have it on the background, that's the ticket for this success.
Can you tell us which camera and lens you have on
here?
Sure.
This is the Lumix GX9, wonderful compact micro four thirds camera. Easy to put on a little tabletop tripod, although I often use them handheld. And this is just the least expensive kit lens, I think, available, the 12 to 32 millimeter lens, which normally is not a macro lens, but I've added an extension tube in between the lens and the camera body. And extension tubes effectively will shift your focusing range closer. It's kind of a misnomer. They don't extend the range of focus, they shift it. So no longer can this lens focus to infinity, but the closer focusing range is now much closer than it would normally have been without, and that turns it into a macro lens.
Cool.
In terms of camera settings, to create a proper exposure for this, putting the camera simply on aperture priority mode when you're using a continuous light is ideal. If your light isn't as bright as you'd like, you might have to crank up your ISO to 1600 or even higher. But these images are lines and shapes, not really high textured patterns, so they would survive noise reduction really well. Aperture typically between f8 and f11 is going to be ideal. You don't want any of a smaller aperture than that. It will create more background detail of the flower in the background that should be out of focus. And also diffraction is going to come in, especially if you have a high resolution camera sensor, and that'll blur your results in your final image.
And are you manually focusing?
So whenever I'm doing this kind of work, it's easier, especially if the camera and the subject are both movable, to move one or the other. You'll want to set your lens to its closest focusing distance and then leave it there. Leave it on manual focus, and then you can physically move the camera or the subject itself forward and backward in order to get your focus. Well, let's take a photo and see what we can come up with.
Yeah, that sounds good. I love how you can see all these little mini water droplets that have the flower actually shown in focus in the image. But I've seen a lot of your work where you have these larger, almost like perfect water droplets. How do you get those?
Well, you have to carefully create them, not just by an array of random chaos, but by carefully placing them, usually on something like a flower petal. And we can do that with either a small little pipette or a needle to carefully place them exactly where they should be and at the size that we want them to be.
Okay, that's cool. Because I've definitely tried to make some water droplets, like dropping them on with a little spoon or something, and it never works.
No, and the thing about the needle, why it's so effective, is that the metal of the needle, a smaller gauge is better, an insulin needle would work very well as well, is that the metal is hydrophobic. And so the water wants to get away from it very, very quickly. And so it will very carefully just drop down exactly where you want it to be and leave the needle as a nice, perfect little sphere. The light in this case is now partly on the foreground as well as the background, but the primary focus of the light is always going to be on the background. If this was in foreground silhouette, then it's going to look quite a bit different than if I was putting it onto the foreground. So you get to play, you get to experiment, and you get to shape the light however it is that you'd like it to be, and finding a point where, just to your own tastes, you find a proper balance between it, and then you can start shooting.
And what are you looking for in your composition? I mean, obviously you want to be able to get the refractions of the flower in the background, but what else are some of the elements that you're looking for here?
Well, part of it is how the water droplets kind of interact with the scene. So for an example, this was a very simple setup of just putting 3 droplets on it. But what if I could get a droplet to dangle off of the end of the flower petal? What if I could, maybe even in some cases, I've added actors into the frame where, if it's the summertime and you've got ants or beetles or something and you can add a little insect into this fantasy world, then it starts to tell a story. And the more powerful of my work in this area are those images that do tell stories and aren't just simply documentary of droplets on flower petals.
Now, is there any particular reason why you've chose to shoot with the Panasonic Micro Four Thirds for macro photography? Are there any benefits to that?
Sort of. With a sensor that is smaller, a 1-to-1 magnification macro lens, which most dedicated macro lenses will get to, will have the perceived magnification of 2-to-1. So if I wanted to get closer and closer to a subject, the smaller things like water droplets or even snowflakes, having a smaller camera sensor means that magnification is already built into your lens without having to do anything extra.
I have to admit, this is a lot easier than I thought it was going to be today. I know we're going to try to break it down into some, simple steps, but I still was expecting it to be a fairly technical process.
It's like a magic trick, right? A magic trick. You don't know how it's done, and you're amazed by it, but as soon as it's revealed, then it's like, oh yeah, I can do that and amaze my friends. So that's kind of what we've done here.
Yeah, this looks like so much fun. And I could totally see people getting carried away, like using different objects besides flowers and...
Put a print in behind, right?
Yeah.
So what if you put a photograph of fire and you have fire inside of water? That'll be an interesting juxtaposition. I've, in the past, even gone to NASA's public domain archives and taken down a photo of the Earth, and print a map and put the map in behind, and you can have the Earth inside of a water droplet as well.
Wow, so awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing how to do all this. I'm kind of excited to get myself a little hand tool and this little twisty arm thingy and some clamps and a needle.
Yes.
I need to get myself a needle.
Get all the right ingredients, the platypod, the gooseneck arm, if we're calling them by actual things, an LED flashlight, a third hand tool, a hypodermic needle, a spray bottle. These are all very simple things for you to easily have access to.
Yeah.
And you'll find many ways to repurpose them for other areas of photography as well.
Cool, awesome. And where can people find you if they want to learn more information about what you do? I know you have a podcast.
I do. So Photo Geek Weekly is my weekly podcast, and that's about just all the industry news, the geekiest stuff that I can find on a weekly basis, and we have a lot of fun on that.
Nerd out about photography.
I don't know, who doesn't enjoy listening to two people geek out about photography? And you can find more of my work and my workshops at my website at doncom.ca, including a macro photography book that will be coming out early in 2020.
That is so exciting. Well, thank you so much for viewing, everyone. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. And if you're new to our channel, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so we can catch you again very soon.